Hi students, today we will be diving into the chapter 5 Principles of Inheritance and Variation. Before starting this session, let me introduce myself. My name is Preeti. I am working as a biology teacher in Spring Valley, Calicut, which is a CBSE school under the patronage of NIT Calicut. I took my MSc in Zoology and BEd in Natural Science. I have already qualified state eligibility test and I have more than 20 years of teaching experience. Teaching is my passion. So welcome to our first session. So I am going to share the screen. Please wait. So in this session, we will begin with an introduction to genetics. We will then talk a bit about the father of genetics, Gregor Mendel, followed by one of his first experiments on inheritance of one gene. This will be followed by some terminology and experimental background. Finally, we will end the session with clearing your doubts. Let us begin with a question. Have you ever seen an elephant giving birth to a giraffe? Or a dog giving birth to a cat? No. Elephants always give birth to baby elephants. And dog always give birth to baby dogs. In general, animals will always produce animals of the same kind. Why is this? Why is something else is not possible? There are millions of animals and sometimes by mistake they might have babies with an extra leg or a tail. But never a baby of a different animal. Why? This is an interesting question. Similarly, I have another question for you. You see, animals produce babies similar to the parents, but they are not identical to their parents. Let us take you, for example. You might have the face cut of your parents, but you are not identical to your parents. Why is that? These and several other questions are studied in a branch of science known as genetics. There are two main concepts you must understand in genetics. The first phenomenon we talked about were animals give birth to the same kind. This phenomenon is called heredity, paramparya. And the second phenomenon where the child is similar to the parent but will have some difference. This phenomenon is called variation, vyathyasa. And genetics is the study of inheritance and variation, or heredity and variation. The foundation for genetics was laid by an Austrian mathematician named Gregor John Mendel. Hence, he is considered as the father of genetics. Mendel was born in 1822 and passed away at the age of 62 in 1884. Mendel had his preliminary education in a monastery in Austria. Further down the line, he went to the University of Vienna for his higher education in mathematics and science. He was studying to be a teacher, but unfortunately, he failed the examination and could not receive a teaching certificate. Even though he was disappointed, he did not leave his passion for science. After this event, Mendel returned back to his monastery and continued his life there, where he started growing pea plants as a hobby. During his cultivation, he came across several interesting observations across several generations of the pea plants. Mental, being a man of science, took notes on these phenomena and studied them in detail. He applied all his knowledge of mathematics and science into his observations and were able to produce many successful theories. These later paved the way for the branch of modern genetics. We discussed that Mendel conducted many experiments on pea plants. Now we are going to discuss one of his first and most important experiments, and it goes like this. Mendel took two pea plants, a tall one and a dwarf one. He cross-pollinated them and produced many babies. From this generation, what he observed was that all the babies were tall. Let us name these as parents and these as generation 1 or F1 generation or first female generation. From his experimentation till F1, he observed that children had the same traits as one of their parents. If you look here, one parent was tall, one was dwarf, and all the children were tall, which is a trait of one of the parents. Another thing he observed was that traits don't get blended, which means if you mix a tall and a dwarf plant, you do not get a medium-sized plant. You can only get a tall or a dwarf plant. With these observations, he moved down to the next experiment. He took one of the tall childs from the F1 generation and self-pollinated it, which means in this case the father and the mother were the same plant. Now, based on your knowledge so far, tell me, how would the offsprings of this cross or F2 generation look like? Would they be all tall plants, all dwarf plants, or a mix of the two, or double the height of their tall plant, or half the height of the dwarf plant, or a combination of these two? What do you think?
So I think all the offsprings will be tall.
Exactly. By logic, they should all be tall plants because from previous observations we find that children only get that trait of one of the parents. And here both parents are tall. Furthermore, traits don't get blended, which means if you mix two tall plants, you don't get double tall plant, you only get a plant of the same height. So the result of this experiment should be a bunch of tall plants with the same height as their parent. But no, what he observed was that for every three tall plants, there was one dwarf plant. So where did this dwarf plant come from? The child was showing a trait that was not present with its parents. This was a very interesting observation. To find an explanation, Mendel conducted the same experiment with several other traits and in large numbers of pea plants. From all these experiments, he came across the following observations. Observation number 1. The traits from the parents showed up in the children. 2. Traits from the grandparents also showed up in the children. 3. Certain trait pairs always occurred in the ratio 3:1. To understand these observations, Mendel did thorough research on large sets of data and came up with the following theories. A trait is defined by two factors. In this case, the height of a pea plant was determined by two factors, which Mendel named capital P for tall trait and small t for dwarf trait. A child gets one of these factors from each parent. Here you can see the parents have two factors each, but only one goes to the child. Similarly, the child passes it to the next generation. Here you can see the child have two factors, but only one goes to its offspring. And so these factors pass on from generation to generation and are responsible for all the traits of an organism. These factors are today called as genes. In regard to the height of a tree plant, we have two genes, capital T and small t. With these genes, there are four possible combinations, capital T, capital T, capital T, small t, capital T, small t, small t. Of these, it was observed that gene combination capital T, capital T, and small t, capital T resulted in tall plants, and only small t combination resulted in a dwarf plant. From this, you can observe that in some tall plants, even though a dwarf factor small t is present, the plant is not dwarf. But in all plants, if a tall factor capital P is present, the plant is tall. This means that capital P has more power, and if it occurs together with the small t, its effect overpowers the effect of small t and the plant becomes tall. Or in other words, the factor capital P dominates the small t. Hence, capital P is called the dominant factor or dominant gene, while the weaker small t is called the recessive factor or recessive gene. Now, using Mendel's theories, let us see if we can explain his experiments. To begin with, Mendel took a tall plant and a dwarf plant as the parents. The genetic combination of the tall plant is given by capital T, and that of the dwarf plant is given by small t respectively. Now, when they are crossed, as per Mendel's theory, one of the two genes from each parent is transferred to the child to make up its genetic combination. Thus, for the F1 generation, we get four possible combinations, namely capital T small t, capital T small t, capital T small t, capital T small t. As you can see, all the children of the F1 generation have the same genetic combination and they all have a capital T gene in their gene pair. By Mendel's theory, since capital T is a dominant gene, if at least one capital T gene is present, it will result in a tall plant. Thus, all the children of the F1 generation should be tall by this theory. And this is exactly what is observed. Moving on to his second experiment, one of the tall plants from the F1 generation was taken and self-pollinated. This means that in the breeding scenario, the father and the mother is the same plant, having the same genetic combination, capital T, small t. Now, when they are crossed, again, as per Mendel's theory, one of the two genes from each parent is transferred to the child to make up its genetic combination. Thus, for the F2 generation, we get four possible combinations, namely capital T, capital T, small t, capital T, and small t. How you can see that in the first combination, both the genes are capital T, which means it will result in a tall plant. In the second combination, one of the genes is capital T, and since capital T is a dominant gene, the resulting plant would be tall by Mendel's theory. In the third combination again, one of the genes is capital T and hence would result in a tall plant. And finally, it can be seen that in the fourth combination, both the genes are small t and small t, and this will result in a dwarf plant. Thus, from the genetic combination generated by Mendel's theory, we can see that for every three tall plants, there will be one dwarf plant, which was exactly what was observed in Mendel's experiments. Thus, we can conclude that Mendel's theory was able to successfully explain his experiments' results. Now, let us discuss some common terminologies. First one, genes. Genes are the modern name for factors. Every trait is created by two genes. A child gets one gene from each parent, and the child passes one of its genes to its offspring, and thus genes migrate from generation to generation. Second one, alleles. Alleles are the opposing factors of the same trait. If height is a trait, then its opposing factors, tall factor capital T and dwarf factor small t, are alleles of the height gene. Third one, genotype. The factor or gene combination is termed as the genotype. Example, the combination shown here, capital T, small t, is a genotype. Capital P is a genotype, like that. Next one is phenotype. The visible feature of the organism is called its phenotype. Example, tallness is a phenotype. Dwarfness is a phenotype. Next one, homozygous. If the two factors or genes in a genotype are same, then that combination is called homozygous. Capital T, homozygous. Small t, homozygous. Next one, heterozygous. If the two factors in the genotype are different, then that combination is called heterozygous. Capital T, small t, example. Now, let us take a closer look at the pea plant experiment. To begin with, let us discuss why pea plants were used. He could have used many other plants, but he did not. Why? This was due to many reasons. Some of the reasons are: first one, pea plants had a short reproductive cycle. It was possible to create a new generation in only 3 months, while other plants would have taken longer, sometimes even years. This means that it was possible to witness many generations in a short time. Second reason, pea plants produce relatively large number of offspring in one reproductive cycle. This means large population of samples to observe and study from. Third reason, it is relatively easy to cultivate the pea plants as they require very less maintenance and very little area to grow. Fourth reason, pea plants can be both self-pollinating and cross-pollinated, which means complex genetic experiments could be performed. Fifth reason, pea plants produce large number of contrasting traits. Another thing about Mendel's experiments were that he used true breeding lines. What is true breeding? A true breeding line is a plant that went over continuous self-pollination and resulted in showing a stable trait, inheritance and expression for several generations. This happens because upon continuous self-pollination,